What is up, you guys? I hope you're all doing well. I'm Tony Fuentes, and today's video is going to be a bit different for the normal videos that I upload. In this case, I'm just going to take you with me through my editing process in portraits in particular. So I'm not going to jump into color grading too hard. That will depend on each of you guys, and I have several videos on color grading already out. So we're just going to focus on the tools that I use, particularly for portraits and for correcting and retouching and getting the most out of your portrait photography. So let's jump into Lightroom and start editing, guys. Okay, guys, so once in Lightroom, I have all these images. So I have 2 days of shoots. This one is taken at night in an old Volkswagen with my girlfriend Danny. We're just having some fun and snapping some shots. So we have these types of images, more like familiar. We wanted to go with a more familiar look, more like Polaroids or something like that, or shot with a disposable camera or something like that. So they're very laid low. They're quite fun. We were having fun, just putting the feet up into the seats of the car, just having a blast and taking these nice photos. Then we took out my Sandmark lights to achieve these types of photographs with the blue light, and I honestly think they're very nice, like this one. Yeah. And the next day we just wanted to shoot some kind of retro like photographs like this ones. So the outfit and the attire was quite important. So in this case we wanted to go with something like 70s, 80s and 90s, something kind of retro. So Danny is wearing here a sweatshirt from Russia 2018, but it kind of looks quite retro, guys. So basically that's what we wanted to do. And we went out on the field and took some portraits with several focal distances. So I have a wide angle lens, a 16mm, the kit lens, and then I have a 30mm for waist up shots, and then a 56mm equivalent to 84 on APS-C sensor cameras to take more like headshots and details on the portraits. So in this case we have all these images taken with wide angle lenses, and as we can see in these images, particularly in these ones, if we put the camera all the way down, we can achieve this distortion where the model apparently is very high or very long, and the distortion elongates the subject. And that's basically how people on Instagram do it. Normally we see lots of photographs of models with very long legs, and basically that's how they do it, with a very wide angle lens and taking advantage of that distortion that the lens has. Yeah, and this shoot was quite fun. Just remember to take several angles, maybe being on top of the model, under it, or in front of it, or the talent. So yeah, it was quite fun. We achieved some nice photographs. I'm just gonna edit one of each, guys. And then we come down to these ones. It's the same day. We just brought another pair of clothing or another change. So it's very important for you to talk to your model, in particular, and the type of shoot or the theme that you want to shoot. So in this case, Danny had some clothes. I had some opinions on the clothing, and therefore for the day we had several outfits ready to change clothing and just go and snap the photographs. So these are quite nice as well. We can see these ones are with wide angle. Then these ones are with 30mm. And then when I wanted to get close-ups of maybe parts of the outfit or the attire or elements like props, in this case I used the 56mm to get that nice bokeh and compression and get some zooming into the details. So that's quite important, guys. And remember, a very important thing when you're shooting models is to make them feel comfortable, guys. You don't want the shoot to be completely rigid, otherwise their expressions on their faces won't be as genuine, and you won't get the greatest results out of those photographs, guys. So another thing so in this case, Danny and me, obviously we have a nice chemistry because she's my girlfriend, and we can talk about things that make her laugh and everything like that to achieve the correct mood to these images, guys. Now, model direction is a pretty big subject, but just a quick hint is that if you want the model to look somewhere, you just don't say it, just don't tell her to look right or to look left. That's very ambiguous. Signal something, maybe an object in the foreground, and then you can correct the model's posture from that. Another thing to say is that if your model isn't performing or isn't posing the way you want it, you can always do it yourself. So you have an example, she has an example, or he has an example on how the poses that you want to achieve are going to look, guys. And lastly but not least, we came inside and we took these photographs down here in this window that we have over here on my studio. And as we can see, Danny was having a blast. She was even putting her tongue out at me and making smiley faces. We're just having some fun and taking very nice portraits, guys. So let's go and edit this, guys. Yeah, so I'm just gonna edit 4, guys. So I'm just gonna edit 4, guys. And so in this case, we have several images. Let's start off by editing this one. Let's go to the develop tab and edit this, guys. Yeah, okay, so in this case, I'm not gonna use any presets. Of course, you can use presets on, I have several on my shop, all these that I have over here. But in this case, I'm just gonna start editing with a very simple edit. And I'm not gonna get into color grading a lot because that will alter a lot of the colors or the natural colors on portraits. So I don't like to get too deep into color grading when I'm shooting people. So let's start off by analyzing what we're gonna do. Okay, so in first hand, we have Danny over here. A very nice portrait, and this one is shot with the 56mm equivalent to 84, so it's a nice focal length, or the perfect focal length for portraits. We get some nice background compression, not too harsh, but still I shot it with 1.4 aperture, so we can see that the nose and her lips are very much in focus, but her eyes aren't. Now, how can we solve this on field? Just pay a little bit more attention on what you're setting your focus to. I could have focused her eyes properly with manual focus, or maybe I could drop down the aperture, close it a bit to a 2.8 to have all her face on focus or have a bigger depth of field, guys. But I like this portrait how it is. I'm just going to edit it, guys. So the first thing that I like to do is get all the basic corrections. Then I'm going to jump into the tools. So you have several tools that are very important for retouching in portraits. Particularly spot removal is very important to delete anything that we don't like in the photograph or any imperfections on the skin. So it's a very nice thing to have. If you're using flash to compensate or to fill in the light, you can always use the red eye corrections. And then we have the gradient fill and the radio filter, which obviously allow us to center a bit more attention to the subject. And obviously the brush tool is quite important as well, guys. So let's start off by editing this portrait, guys. So in the basic corrections, we can see that this light or this image is a bit tinted towards the greens. That's something that Sony has. So I'm just gonna use the little white balancing selector and select something that I know is white on the image, and automatically the program corrects the temperature and the tint. So in the tint, we can see that it's turned up a bit to the purples to compensate that greenish tones that I was talking about. But in this case, the temperature, I really don't like it, so I'm just going to return it. Now remember, I don't like to move exposure and contrast. I basically prefer to move all the values individually, the highlights, the whites, shadows, and blacks. So for starters, normally what I do is pull up the shadows, but in this case, they bring out a lot of the background that I don't really like. It's very distracting. So for this case, I'm just going to pull down the shadows, and then contrary to that, I'm just going to pull up the blacks to make the image a lot more bright, more around there. I'm quite happy with that, guys. And then the highlights, it's a pretty nice light with the diffusion that the window light offers. But in this case, I just wanted to amp up a bit of the highlights, just a little bit, and reduce a bit of the whites to make them a little bit less harsh, just like that. Happy with that. Next up, texture, clarity, and the haze, guys. Now this is very important, guys. Normally we're tempted to amp up the texture and the clarity, particularly in all other types of photographs, like in landscapes, urbans, all of those, and product photography. The texture and the clarity are very nice tools, but in portraits, I don't really like them. You see, if we move them up, we can see that it's looking very horrible, guys. And she's looking like, well, I'm not going to say anything because she's my girlfriend, but I'm just going to put them down. So in this case, I'm just going to pull them down all the way down to -12, -15, right around those. And here we can see that we've lost a bit of contrast and a bit of sharpness, but that's quite nice for portraits, guys. Now the haze is a tool that I really like for portraits, particularly in women, where we can make the skin glow a bit. So in this case, we can see if we move it to the negatives, it tends towards the whitish tones, and it looks like a bit more like dreamy look, and it's very nice, guys. I'm not going to move it too much, just around the 20% or the 19. I'm very happy with that, guys. And if we put Y on our keyboard, we can see what we've done. And so far, she's looking very glowy and very nice, guys. It's a very nice effect with the dehaze. Now, vibrance and saturation, I don't like to move them in particular for portraits. Maybe if you're going for a more stylized look, it is convenient. But in this case, I'm just going to finish the basic editing like that. And I'm going to go to the spot removal tool to remove some imperfections on her skin. Now, the spot removal tool allows you to clone or to heal. Now, to clone is basically to copy one part of the image and put it in another part. So if you want to copy, let's say, an object, you can basically replicate it with the clone tool. And then the heal is basically the same, but with a lot more diffusion, and it blends it into the image, guys. So I'm just going to select the heal tool, and with the mouse or the scroll button on our mouse, we can move the size up. We can also move it over here. And I'm just going to select all the pimples and all the imperfections that Danny may have on her skin. I don't like to remove everything, maybe the moles. Those are more natural and normal to her skin, but things like pimples are temporary and I don't like them in the image. So let's remove them, and we can select it. And automatically the program selects something to fill in that space. We can also move it or adjust it to a particular part of the image that we want to replicate it. But I'm just going to leave it like that. Also, you can basically draw and drag everything just like that. And we can just remove it with other parts of the image, but I don't like it. So let's start off by removing some of spots, red spots over here, another spot over here. Now you don't want to do it too much, otherwise the portrait is going to be very plasticky and not very natural or very organic. Just gonna leave it like that. Maybe remove a bit more over here, like this one. No, this one, just like that. Hit enter, and I'm quite happy with that, guys. Now we can see that her imperfections on her face have basically disappeared, and it's looking very much clean, guys. Okay, so next up, what I want to do is use a radial filter to center a bit more attention on her. Now, in this case, we don't have any other distracting things, but for some portraits, it's quite useful, guys. So let's use the radial filter, and I'm just gonna draw it out to her face, just like that. And you have two options. So in this case, we can alter everything but her face. So in this case, if we move the exposure up, everything around that circle that we drew is gonna highlight, or it's gonna underexpose, or we can invert it and just adjust what we've selected in the parameters of the circle. I'm just gonna amp up a bit of the exposure, just a little bit, just like that, to make her face pop up a lot more in respect to her arms. I'm just gonna feather it just a bit, hit enter. Quite happy with that. And next up, we're finished with the basic corrections, guys. Now let's go down to a tone curve. Now in tone curve, in this case, I'm just gonna add a bit more contrast by pulling down the shadows just a little bit, and maybe fading out the blacks just ever so slightly, just like that, guys, not too much. That's all I'm gonna do in the tone curve for now. Then HSL and split toning, remember, I'm not gonna move them, but if you do move them, if you want to achieve a more cinematic or more stylized look, I always encourage you to first, before you move all the sliders on the hue, saturation, and luminance, find what slider moves the color tone on your model's skin. So in this case, I can see that orange is the one that is applicable to her skin. So for that, I recommend not moving the orange at all. And now we can see the red moves a bit of her skin as well. So this one's going to be a lock for me in that manner. Meanwhile, the yellows don't really affect her skin tone, so I'm free to move them as my will, guys. So just remember that, guys. Okay, now in split toning, here we can add some colors to the highlights and the shadows, but in this case, I'm just going to move them. This portrait is looking very nice, just like that. Now over in detail, in this case, it's shot with ISO 320. It's not too much, it's not very distracting, the noise. I'm just going to leave it like that. And the sharpening, I'm just going to leave it as well like that. I like this gloomy effect that we've achieved. If we add some sharpening, it's going to counter the lowness on the texture that we already did. Then lens corrections, remember that lens correction is always important to highlight, but in this case, I'm just going to decrease them. And as we can see, a bit of vignette has appeared and a bit of distortion has been enabled. But yeah, that will depend on you guys. Normally the lenses aren't perfect, guys, so the company sends all the corrections to Lightroom, and Lightroom can obviously automatically compensate them. But yeah, that will depend on you guys. Sometimes it's good effect, sometimes it's too much. So in this case, I'm just going to leave them on, I think. Yeah, down to camera calibration. This is an important hint, guys. For portraits in particular, here we can see that she has some blushiness, and some red parts on her skin. And I like to emphasize all those things a bit more. So in this case, we just move the green primary up and the saturation up. And as we can see, her skin has a lot more tones in them. It's just a way to get more rich skin tones in your model, guys. So yeah, we can see what we've done by clicking on and off this point. And obviously her skin is a bit more, it has more color to it and more deviations of the color. So it's very nice, guys. Now we're basically finished with this portrait. What I like always to do at the end is zoom into her eyes. I know they're out of focus, guys, but by selecting the brush tool, we can highlight a bit of the eyes and make them a bit more gloomy. So I'm just going to select it, just color the eyes or the pupils and the cornea, just like that, and the other side as well. And then I'm just going to amp up a bit of the exposure and the contrast. Now I don't want to go to the extreme. She's not an alien or a zombie. Just going to leave it just a bit high, around the 0.5, and a bit of the contrast, just like that. We can see the before and after, and the eyes just pop up a little bit more, and I'm quite happy with that, guys. Now this effect is very used is very nice to have, and particularly if your model has blue eyes, green eyes, or gray eyes, it really makes them pop up and stand out a lot more, guys. So I'm quite happy with these results, guys. We can see the before and after, and this portrait is very nice, guys. Let's go to the next one. Okay, guys, so next up we have this one, a very nice portrait of Danny getting out of the car and just illuminated with the light on the parking lot. So the first thing, I want to save a bit of the image, and the image is very underexposed, and I'm not going to do it with exposure because the image starts to fall apart. What I'm going to do is move the blacks all the way up and the shadows, and that's the limits of this image, guys. It's a 14-bit RAW. If we move the exposure up, we're playing a bit more with a bit more dynamic range that the image really has. So I'm just going to leave it like that. And this is basically the maximum amount of light in the shadows and the blacks that this image has. So this image is going to be quite simple, guys. The first thing I like to do is amp up a little of the highlight, just a little bit, to make her pop up a little bit more. And as we can see, this image over here, it says it's shot with ISO 1600. So that's a lot of ISO. We can see all the noise on the image. And how do we correct that? Just going all the way down to the detail and adding a bit of noise reduction. Now we don't want to go to the extreme, otherwise this image looks overall very soft. Just gonna go up a bit to around the 40%, to a point where it's not too distracting, but it's still present, guys. We do maintain a bit of the sharpness that we have. So I'm happy with that. Next up, in this case, I'm just gonna add a color to the shadows in split toning. So in split toning, what I like to do is with Alt on our keyboard pressed down, we can move the slider up and down and we can see the color at full saturation. So I'm just gonna go with a teal color just like this one and add a bit of saturation just like that. Not too much, but just around there. Okay, next up, for this case, I'm not going to move the clarity up. Instead, I'm going to move it down just like texture, and the dehaze just a little bit down to make her a bit more gloomy, just like that, guys. Maybe the dehaze in this case is too much, just I'm happy with that. Color grading, in this case, I'm just going to skip it basically completely, and I'm just going to jump into retouching, guys. So here we have another car in the back that I don't really like. It's quite distracting. So for that, I'm going to use the gradient filter. I'm just going to draw it just like this and put it all the way down, and everything that I've just passed is going to be color graded or corrected with the settings that I'm going to apply. So in this case, I'm just pull down the exposure and basically get rid of that car in the background. Then I'm going to add another one over here to make this image or this area a bit more dark, like that. Pull down the exposure. Happy with that. Make it a bit more minimalistic. And then I'm just going to add a radial filter over here around her face. Just take your time, guys. Always take your time. And basically, I'm just going to add a bit more highlights. Just going to amp up a bit of the highlights. Remember to invert it. I didn't invert it. Amp up a bit of the highlight. Just a little bit. And the blacks, I'm just going to pull them down a bit to not lose all that contrast that we have of the light. Just like that. Hit enter. And I'm very happy with this result, guys. With Y on our keyboard, we can see what we've done. And this portrait is looking very nice. Maybe it's a bit too overexposed over here, so I'm just going to decrease a bit of the highlights, just a bit, like that. But it's looking very nice, guys. Let's go to the next one, guys. Another one from that night. Remember that we were having a lot of fun, and basically we just wanted to have some nice memories in the car at night. So in this case, we have this image of Danny singing, grabbing the seat of the car, and I want to go with black and white. And for black and white, guys, you just need to press V on your keyboard, and automatically the program turns the image and the palettes to the monochrome settings, guys. So in this case, there are several things that I like to do with black and white, and contrary to portraits with color, I like to amp up the clarity and the texture just a bit. And as you can see, it really pops up a lot more the image, not too much. Otherwise, we have a lot of detail on expressions that I don't really like, and quite happy with that. Next up, the dehaze, I'm just going to leave it like that. And what I like to do is pull down a bit of the blacks, bring up a bit of the shadows just like that to make it a bit more punchy and more contrasty. And then over here in the tone curve, here we can add a bit more contrast with a simple S shape just like that. Maybe pull up a bit of the blacks to make them a bit more faded, not too much. Yeah, I'm going to leave them just like that. And remember, here we can add some colors. Now you're maybe thinking black and white with colors. Yeah, there are a lot of effects in the black and white. Then we move to the red tone curve, and here we can add some colors. We can move it up to acquire some reddish tones, or to the other side to acquire some teal and orange like looks. The greens as well, you can move them up. for greens and the other side to the magentas. And then of course we can always use the blue tone curve, and the blue we have to the one side the blues and to the other side the oranges, guys. So if you want to get some sepia like tones, you can always move the blues all the way down just like this, and here the image is a bit more sepia. But in this case I'm just going to skip it, that's a nice way you can alter the colors. And by the way, you can do this also in images with color, not just in black and white. And then again, in split toning you also have the ability to use some colors in your black and white images. So in this case, if you wanted to go for more sepia like tones, you can always move the shadows to more sepia like colors like this one, amp up a bit of the saturation also in the highlights. Yeah, it's looking very nice. Now in this case, for this image, maybe I would like to reduce a bit of the blacks, just pull them up just a bit, not too contrasty, and the whites are quite too much, just pull them down. And then basically this image is looking quite nice, like fond memories on the childhood. Also, we can always use the effects to add a bit more grain or to add a bit of vignette. I normally don't use positive vignette because it's quite white, but maybe in this case it kind of works, guys. It's looking very awful. A bit more zoom out, just like that. And the roundness is going to crop it just a bit. And then feather it out all the way to the 100%. And yeah, that's a bit to the effect, guys. So basically that's an edit I'm not very fond of, but it's a way you can edit some black and white photographs. Remember, V on your keyboard is to activate the monochrome settings. Yeah, so let's jump into another one with real colors. So I have these images of Danny, they're very beautiful out here, but I'm going to choose this one, I think. Yeah, and go to the develop tab. Now this image is very nice, but I have some things that I don't like. I don't like the greens in particular, and I don't like these wires in the back and this mesh, or I don't know how to call it. So the first thing I like to do is amp up the shadows in this case, because this image is shot at midday and there's hard contrast light. So amp up the shadows to achieve a bit more information in the blacks, and then amp up the blacks just a bit as well. I want it to be more light and more like sunny day, something like that. I think the highlights and the whites are very nice. Maybe we could see a bit of overexposure over here, so I'm just going to decrease a bit of the whites. Yeah, just like that. And I'm quite happy with the overall basic corrections. Next up, again, texture is going to go down a bit, and clarity, and as we can see the face of Danny is looking a bit more soft. And then just amp up this bloom effect with the dehaze button to make her pop up just a little bit more. Okay, so it's looking very nice. Next up, in the tone curve. So in this case, I'm just going to amp up a bit of the shadow, just a little bit, just like that, not too much, and decrease a bit of the highlights. Yeah, happy with that. Make it a bit more light, like colors. And over here in saturation, in the color grading, here I'm just going to jump in and decrease the saturation of the yellows. As we can see, the yellows control a lot of the green in the back. If you know me, you know I'm not very fond of the greens, so I'm just going to decrease them as well. And then in the hue, I'm just going to turn them towards the yellowish tones, so it's a bit more sepia-like in the background. So it's looking quite nice for my taste. And another thing that you can do in the HSLs is isolate the color of her skin tones. So in this case, I know that it's the oranges, and I'm going to make the oranges pop up a lot more, so her skin pops up and she's a bit more flashy and a lot more gloomy. So as we can see, move the luminance tab up, her skin really starts to pop up a lot more, quite a bit, just like that, to make her pop and to make her highlight just a little bit more. Now in this case, I want to go with the sepia tones, so I'm going to move in with a nice orangey color like that, amp up a bit of the saturation, and as well over here in the shadows. And the image is looking quite sepia, very nice, guys. With Y on our keyboard we can see what we've done, and it's looking very nice, guys. I'm liking it quite a bit. Okay, so next up, we don't need any detail, we don't need any extra sharpness or noise reduction. In this case, it's just shot with the base ISO of my camera, but I am going to go all the way down to the primary greens and do the same. Just amp up a bit of the greens and the saturation to achieve a bit more tones in the skin tones, just like that. Happy with that. Then I'm going to go with a spot removal tool to remove some of the imperfections. So in this case, I'm just going to remove maybe this little pimple over here in this image, and she doesn't have a lot of imperfections. Just quickly remove them by clicking on them. Quite happy with that, guys. But now I see a little overexposure over here. I'm just going to adjust the whites just a bit more. Just pull them down just a little bit, just like that, and the highlights overall. Before I add any grain or any vignetting, I want to remove all these things from the background, these wires in the back. And for that, the spot removal tool isn't quite as much as powerful. I will need to use Photoshop. So to edit it in Photoshop, just gonna right click, edit in, and edit in Photoshop, and automatically the program will open up Photoshop with this image as a TIFF file. And I'm sorry that my Photoshop is in Spanish, guys. I didn't know why the language didn't change, but it's just going to be the same thing. So we have the corrector tools over here, which are basically the spot removal tools that we see in Lightroom, but a bit more powerful. And I'm just going to use another tool, guys. So I'm just going to use the selection tools to select all the wires in the background. So I'm just going to do it very broadly, guys. You should really take your time to do this. Just like this. I'm just going to go all the way down. And then I'm just going to use the content aware fill to remove all these things. So with shift and backspace on our keyboard, we can use the content aware fill to remove this thing that we just selected, guys. Now the program Photoshop will do its magic, and here we can see that it's basically disappeared. We have some flaws over here, but we're just going to correct those further along. But it basically did all the work for us, guys. So for this case, I'm just going to use the corrector tool once again and just make it a bit bigger and remove all the apparent lines that the content aware fill didn't really black out, guys. Quite happy with that. Here we can see a bit of a line, so I'm just going to make it a bigger, just like that. Yeah, quite happy with that. I'm going to do the same with the other ones, just quickly select them with the lasso tool in this case. You can do it with any kind of selection tool. You can do it with the magic wand. You can even do it with square tool or the ellipse tool, anything like that. Just going to select it, select the others while we're at it. So basically this is the way you can eliminate anything that you don't really like on your photographs, any people in your landscape photographs, or any advertisers or anything like that on the street. You can basically remove them. This is going to be just a real quick example. I'm not selecting properly because I'm short on time. I don't want to make this video 3 hours long, of course, guys. So just like that, then shift backspace on our keyboard, hit OK. And this is what we have at the end. So in this case, I do have to use the correction tool quite a bit to remove it, some of the traces that were left behind. Obviously, I always recommend to take your time with these things, guys. I'm just really speeding. I don't really want to take too much time on these things. But overall, I think we did a pretty good job, guys, just like that. And once we finished, I think it's quite good. There's not too much distortion. You can obviously work a bit harder. You can Control S to save it, and Photoshop won't save it to your desktop or anything like that. It will automatically save it to Lightroom, guys. So now we can jump into Lightroom once again. And here our image does appear next to the original one. This one has the cables. And we scroll to the left, we have this new one that we just edited in Photoshop. Okay, so the final retouching things that I'm gonna do is go all the way down to the effects, add a bit of grain to make it a bit more like if it was shot, and put it in a matte-like picture. So just add a bit more texture. In this case, I'm just gonna add a bit more roughness and size, just a little bit, just like that, to make it a bit more notorious. Has a nice texture to it. Next up, just gonna add a bit more vignette towards the dark side, just like that. And finally, I'm just going to use a radial filter to highlight a bit of the face of the talent, in this case, which is Danny. And add a bit more to the highlights, just like this. Amp a bit of the shadows and the whites, just like that. Feather it and hit enter. Here's the comparison, the before and the after. Quite happy with those results, guys. And that's basically all I do with my portraits, guys. This was more of a walkthrough, what I do normally in the retouching aspects, not much in the color grading, but normally those are the steps that I take. Maybe I take a little bit more time when it's a photo shoot for a client. So in this case, I wasn't too meticulous. I just wanted to show you a quick and brief aspect of what I do normally and what you should do. I consider it to be some basics in the portraits on retouching on Lightroom and in Photoshop. If you did like the video, guys, there's many ways you can support me just by giving a like. Maybe you can become a member to my channel. In exchange, I give you some free presets every month, or you can buy some merch or my presets down below. So if you did like the video, can you please give it a like? It really makes a difference, and consider subscribing. Hit the notification bell to be notified when I upload the next video. I'm Tony Fuentes. Cheers to all of you, and see you in the next one.